Now, as far as the Falcons go all time, Julio Jones holds that record again in 2015. He had 1,871 yards. So, in fact, Julio Jones holds the top six spots for the team. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host, and I am back looking at another team from the NFC, specifically the NFC North. So I'm covering every team heading into the 2025 season. There are only 24 days left till the first regular season game of the 2025 NFL season. And we did have some preseason games this last few days, so that was something to watch. Um, though it is only preseason, so you don't see the starters too much. Now, as a Jacksonville Jaguar fan, though this has nothing to do with Atlanta, but I did watch their game, and just to take one highlight away, and if you have the opportunity, you can go on YouTube or almost anywhere and look it up. But Cam Little, the kicker, field goal kicker for the Jaguars, the end of the first half, kicked a 70-yard field goal. Made it by probably a yard or two. Could have maybe went even hot farther, but that was incredible to watch. I mean, everybody was just going crazy for the Jaguars as it went over the uh, goalpost. So that was fun, at least. Um, but that's enough of the Jaguars. Back to the Atlanta Falcons. So let's take a look at the Atlanta Falcons, and we're going to look at the greatest Falcons, compare that with a team from 2024, and we'll finish up by looking at this upcoming season and see where they stand in that as far as a team and as far as fantasy football goes. All right. So, despite finishing second in the division, they ended up with a losing record and missed the playoffs. The Falcons finished the season with a record of 8 wins, 9 losses at home. They were 4 wins, 5 losses. On the road, 4-4, and in the division, 4-2. So not bad in the division. Um, obviously, as people will say, it's one of the weaker divisions currently, but it will be definitely improving. I mean, you do have, especially when you have Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think Atlanta is going to be a better team this coming season. So, all right, how do the Falcon players of 2024 stand in relation to the greatest Falcon players of all time and to the NFL as a whole? Well, that's what we're going to find out right now on this episode of Just the Stats NFL. All right, so we'll start with the coaches. Mike Smith from 2008 to 2014 has the most wins as a coach for the Atlanta Falcons, which is only 66 wins. So really not that many. Team's been around since 1966, so they just haven't had any one coach that's been able to do uh, anything super outstanding. He had a 589 winning percentage, which actually, if you're not counting somebody who was just a part-time coach, that is the best winning percentage for the Atlanta Falcons. Dan Reeves was second with 49 wins. Now, Raheem Morris, the current coach, um, this past year had an 8-9 record, which was better than the 3 years prior with Arthur Smith. Every year he was the coach, they finished 7-10. This is actually, despite this being his first full season, this is actually Raheem Morris's second stint as head coach. Dan Quinn in 2020 was fired after 5 games, going 0-5. Raheem Morris took over and finished up the season at going 4-7. And then Arthur Smith came along. Raheem Morris was off the scene, came back in 2024, and now he's back in 2025 with, I think, an improved quarterback situation, and we'll talk about that some. So Raheem Morris is currently the new coach, and he's, as farther down the list with only 12, total of 12 wins when you count the fact that he had 4 the previous season. Um, he's 12th, and if he could have say even a 10, if he had a 10-win season, which would be definitely an improvement by a game or two, um, he could easily move up into the top 10 and pass Arthur Smith, which would be a nice um, achievement for him, seeing as the Falcons passed him up for Arthur Smith, but they came back to him as their head coach, and we'll see how he does. Hard to tell after one season, but they look pretty good, especially on offense. All right, let's look at some career records. Start with the quarterbacks. Matt Ryan is by far the number one quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons with 59,735 yards in his career. When you add that to the other team he played for, he ended up with 62,792 yards in his career, which was from 2008 to 2022. So you can see that all but 3,000 of the yards came with the Atlanta Falcons. And there's nobody even close. Steve Bartkowski from 1975 to 85 had 23,470. So this is a record that's going to stand for quite a long time. Um, not going anywhere as far as that total goes. So Michael Penix is the new quarterback, and so he's got a long way to haul. But hopefully, if he's a great quarterback, as a quarterback does, team will keep him, and we'll see how he plays it out. So that's as far as yards go. When it comes to touchdowns, this is all going to be Matt Ryan. 367 touchdowns to Bartkowski with 154. And then interceptions. Now, this is still Matt Ryan over Bartkowski, 170 to 141. Those two are the top two because they just played longer than anybody else for the team. Now, when it comes to sacks, well, that's Matt Ryan again with 450 times he was sacked in his career. Quite a bit. Not quite enough to make the top 8, fortunately for him, but still a lot. Steve Bartkowski ended up with 345. Difference being that Matt Ryan was sacked at a 5.3% rate, while Steve Bartkowski was sacked at a 9.4% rate, which is why the numbers are a little closer despite the many more years that Ryan was the quarterback for the team. Let's look at the running backs. Now here, again, this is very interesting. You have no real dominant. You have 4 players within 700 yards of each other in the top 4. Gerald Riggs from 1982 to 1988 ended up with 6,631 yards. Michael Turner from 2008 to 2012, and not that long a span either, 6,081 yards. Quite a career in a short time frame. Those are the only 2 players over 6,000 yards. So there is nobody that's just standing out. So now you have the 2 current running backs at number 10 and 11. Bijan Robinson, who started a year after Tyler Algier, who's 11th, they're the top 2. So you can see that they're going to just climb this chart easily. Robinson, in just 2 years, already has 2,432 yards, which puts him 10th. He has another 1,200-yard season. He's easily moves up to 8th. And so in a couple of years, he'll be pushing the top 5, which would be Jamal Anderson, who's in 5th. But those really are your top 2, and we'll watch them. Algier, of course, had the lead. He had a year head start on Robinson, which is how he got his up there. And they're both good, but Robinson's especially great, exceptional running back. So when it comes to touchdowns, this is Michael Turner with 60 touchdowns in his career to lead the Atlanta Falcons. Gerald Riggs was second with 48. only 2 even over 35, so big lead there. Again, we're gonna be watching especially Bijan Robinson, who already has 18. So he's averaging 9 a season. Another 9 will put him up to 8th place. In 2 seasons, he'll be 3rd all-time already, as long as everything goes well for him. So really, those are your 2 top running backs. Very good pair of running backs for the Atlanta Falcons right now. I mean, Robinson, in if you're playing fantasy football, is always right there in the top of the top first half of the first round. So he's really excellent. All right, let's look at the wide receivers. Now here you have 2 great ones. One especially great, who's going to be a Hall of Famer as soon as he's eligible, and that is Julio Jones from 2011 to 2020 at 12,896 yards receiving for the Atlanta Falcons to lead the team. He had passed Roddy White, who played with him for over a period of time, for about a 4-year span. Roddy White had 10,863 yards. So those definitely the top 2 uh, wide receivers in yards. And we're looking at total yards then. Um, start with the yards here. Let me find it real quick. With 12,896 yards, Julio Jones is near the top, but not quite in the very top. But he is one of the best wide receivers there's ever been. Now, when it's coming to receptions, just receptions, as far as wide receivers go, well, that's Julio Jones again with 848 to Roddy White with 808. So those are your top 2 as far as receptions and yards go. Now, when we're looking at uh, tight ends, well, it's Tony Gonzalez, of course, from 2009 to 2013. He had 603 receptions. I'm sorry, 409 receptions on 603 targets. 409 receptions for 4,187 yards. Quite a career. And when you're looking at Tony Gonzalez over his entire career, he ended up with 15,127 yards to be the number 1 tight end all time ahead of Jason Witten. And in in receptions also, he has 1,325. Jason Witten is second with 1,228. So those 2 are incredible. Tony Gonzalez is 3rd all time in receptions. Pretty incredible. And 6th all time when it comes to yards. So quite a tight end there too. And we'll talk about the current tight end when we talk about the fantasy people. But those are the top 2 right now. So obviously, when we're talking about receptions, we'll stick to that before we look at the touchdown category. Drake London already has 241 receptions for the team. That puts him at 17. I expect him to have 100 receptions this year. If he does, that's going to push him all the way up to 7th all time. If he has an exceptionally good total, he could move up into 6th, say about 115 receptions. That'd be incredible. Well, actually, about 119. So that would be quite a season. But he's definitely somebody that qualifies to reach that level. As far as tight ends go, Kyle Pitts is the leading tight end currently with 196 receptions over his career. We'll see what happens with him after this season, but he's the leader there. Same in yards already. Drake London is 17th again in yards as well with 3,042. So he has 1,000-yard season plus. Again, he could easily move all the way to 6th place. So he's somebody that we'll be watching as far as those records go. Now, when it comes to touchdowns, again, this is an area where there is no huge lead. As great as Julio Jones was, he just didn't get the touchdowns that some other wide receivers did. But he ended up with 60, but that's only second on the team to Roddy White, who had 63. So those are your top 2 again, but, really no one who's just jumped out there. As tight end, even Tony Gonzalez only had 35 with the team, which tied him with Algie Crumpler, who also had 35. Crumpler played from 2001 to 2007. So those are your top 2 tight ends. Um, Player that's currently still playing, Calvin Ridley, was 10th on the team with 28. Of course, he's not playing for this team anymore, but he was up there. But I do expect to see Drake London, who has 15 currently. So he gets another 8 this year or so, 6 to 8. He could move probably no higher than 12th at the best, I would say. And it'll take him a couple years to move up this list. But if he continues to be the guy, we'll be watching him as he could be the wide receiver that breaks every record that the team has, even that of Julio Jones. We'll see. So those are your tight ends, your wide receivers. All right. Now let's look at and I should want say one more thing about Tony Gonzalez. He had 35 touchdowns for the Atlanta Falcons. And then he also played prior to the Atlanta Falcons. He played for many years with the Kansas City Chiefs. But Tony Gonzalez ended up with 111 touchdown receptions, which puts him at 8th all time. He'll probably get passed this year by Mike Evans for sure, who has 105. He only needs 6 to pass him. And maybe even Devontae Adams, who has 103. So he would need 8, 9 to pass him 8 to time. So those would be 2 current players that could pass Tony Gonzalez and bump him down this list a little bit. All right. Next up, we'll look at the defense. So as far as defensive players, when we're looking at interceptions, we'll start with that. All time in interceptions, if I can get it to come up, the all-time record is held by Paul Krause with 81, who did that way back from 64 to 79. And then currently, for the Atlanta Falcons, it's Rolland Lawrence in 1973 to 1980 had 39. So obviously nowhere near the number that Paul Krause had. 39 is the highest total. Ray Brown had 31, so quite a big difference. He played from 1971 to 77. So those two did overlap for a while. So that might have been a pretty good defensive team for them in those years. So currently, there's really nobody in interceptions. It's rare that there are. Jesse Bates already has 10. So that's one player that we'll be watching. He's got 10 in just 2 years. So that's pretty good. So you figure he averages 5. Again, he'll move up to 13th. He could get 7. He'd be in the top 10 already. So we'll watch him as far as current players go. Now, when we're looking at tackles for loss, all-time leader is Jonathan Babineau, who had 91. So there's no player. Most teams have at least one player with 100. Nobody on this team. Like I said, Jonathan Babineau had 91 tackles for loss. He played from 2005 to 2016. So not too bad. Now, John Abraham played the same time almost, 2006 to 2012. Not quite as many years on the back end, but started a year after he did. But he had 79 tackles for loss for the team. So there's a couple good players. Grady Jarrett, who was on the team last year, had moved all the way up to 3rd for the team. He had been on the team since 2015, and he ended up with 77 over that period of time. So that was the current leader. There's nobody after that who's playing right now. Lorenzo Carter is the highest player right now, but again, he's not on the team either. So it's a whole new team, it looks like, as far as that goes. We got David Onyemata, Now he's on the team. He's only been on the team for 2 years, so we'll see how he does. David, yeah, yeah, say that one more time. Say that fast. Um, David Onyemata. If I'm saying that right. Let's see what he had for that. He's got 14. So again, not very impressive on a yearly basis. You need even more than 14 in a season to be halfway good in that. So that's a weak area right now for the Atlanta Falcons. Let's look at the sack totals. Claude Humphrey, by far, and again, nobody over 100 sacks, but he had 99 and a half from 1968 to 1978. John Abraham was second with only 68 and a half. Huge difference. Only 3 players that have over 60. This is a stat that usually you'll see players more current on this list, and there really isn't anybody. It's uh, it's amazing, and there's been quite a turnover for the Falcons as far as their defense goes. So I'm not even seeing any of the players that are listed, even going up into last year, that are even on the team anymore. So this is going to be a category, in fact, every defensive category where you're not going to see anybody um, on this list moving up too far up the list for any time soon. So we'll just have to wait and see how that goes. All right, let's move to quarterbacks on a season level and see who's been the top guy there. Well, that's of course Matt Ryan. This is one of the most outstanding things. I've seen some, even when you look at Tom Brady, I'm not even sure he has quite the same this here as Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan, probably somebody like him, but Matt Ryan holds 11 of the top 12 spots as far as most yards in a single season. Um, Twice he threw for over 4,900 yards. Pretty impressive. Never quite made the 5,000 club. That's happened 15 times, and he never quite made it. Pretty close. But in 2016, he had 4,944 yards. That was the most he ever had. So pretty impressive. Let me bring over here. Let's see here. Bring this up here. All right. So obviously, the team last year is not going to have anybody that far up the list because um, Kirk Cousins he played part of the season, and then Michael Penix finished up the season. So uh, Kirk Cousins ended up finishing 17th with 3,508 yards for the season. When it comes to touchdowns, Matt Ryan again at 38 touchdowns is the top. Only 5 times has a quarterback thrown for over 30 or more touchdowns. 3 times by Matt Ryan, twice twice by Steve Bartkowski. And then again, this is a category where Matt Ryan holds 9 of the top 11 spots. So, um, but only 38 is the highest total, which is not incredibly high. It's not bad, of course. It's pretty good. But for somebody who's throwing for that many yards, it's a little bit down there as far as that goes. Now, Kirk Cousins threw 18 touchdowns last season. Unfortunately, he also threw 16 interceptions, so that kind of hurt his numbers. You don't want to have basically a one for one trade off there. Now, when looking at interceptions, I'm not really comparing these quarterbacks to the quarterbacks of 2024 for the rest of the NFL because with a season like that, there's one player that's going to be that far up the list. I mean, for example, Kirk Cousins finished 18th in yardage. Um, so, I mean, obviously, he'd have been higher if he played the entire season. We'll see what Penix does this year. Now, interceptions, Bobby Hebert, 1996, threw 25 interceptions in a single season. That's the record for the team. Um, and this is where Matt Ryan's really pretty impressive. His worst season was in 2013. Worst season, that is. He only threw 17. So he's pretty good with the ball as far as interceptions go. All right. Now, one other category, how many times was quarterback sacked? Well, there's only one time Steve Barkowski was sacked 51 times. The only player ever sacked over 50 times. So that Steve Barkowski holds that dubious record as well as the interception record. Um, no, actually, I'm sorry. He was second with the interceptions. Bobby Hebert was first with that category. So in sacks, again, it was Barkowski. So that's an area where you obviously don't want to be up the top of the list. Matt Ryan was pretty good there. He did have a season where he was sacked 48 times, which was his worst season um, way back in 2019. So starting to get toward the end of his career as far as that went. All right, those are your quarterbacks, and we'll have a lot more to say about quarterbacks. I hope this year when Penix, if he plays the entire season, I'm looking forward to seeing how he does. All right, let's look at the running backs. Well, this is Jamal Anderson in a single season, 1998, rushed for 1,846 yards. That's the number one running back as far as that goes. Gerald Riggs in 1985 had 1,719, second best. In fact, Gerald Riggs, pretty interesting. He 1984, which is the fifth total, had 1,486, and then he came right back the next year with 1,719. Jamal Anderson had that big year, but that's the only year. His next best year was in 1996, 2 years earlier, when he only had 1,055. So he really had that one big year as far as that goes. Interestingly, 20th on the list all time is Michael Vick, who in 2006 had 1,039 yards. Wouldn't that be something to watch when you have a quarterback? And you can watch that, say, with Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels now. So two guys you can watch do that kind of running as a quarterback. So when we're looking at the current team and we're looking at the running backs, well, Bijan Robinson had 1,456 yards to lead the team. Pretty impressive as far as that goes, which is good enough already to put him at sixth on the list. So you're hoping for another season like that. Algier had 644 yards. Now, of course, he had a 1,000-yard season as well prior to the arrival of Robinson. So he's a pretty good player. He's just trying to verify that. Let's see. Let me look at Tyler Algier. Yeah, in 2022, he had 1,035 yards. So not bad. But obviously, like they drafted him the very next season, they must have saw something or just knew they wanted Robinson because the very next season, even though they had a 1,000-yard rusher, they turned right around and picked up Robinson, which turns out to be quite a haul for them. So that's your leading rusher when it comes to touchdowns in a single season. Michael Turner in 2008 had 17, three touchdown lead over Jamal Anderson and Bijan Robinson, who in 2024 had 14. So now this is this category where we should be comparing these numbers to the players that were last year. Obviously, Saquon Barkley led the NFL with 2,005 yards, but Robinson ended up fourth in the. Let me get that right. He ended up third. I'm sorry, third. Quite a distance, though, obviously behind Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, but he was third in the NFL with 1,456 yards. So he had quite a good year. Now, it came to touchdowns, he was fifth. You had three players again: Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs, James Cook all had 16 touchdowns, and Josh Jacobs for Green Bay had 15. And then you have Robinson with 14, tied with Kyron Williams and Jalen Hurts, quarterback, with that tush push. That's the only reason he's up there that high. Those were your leaders. So he's quite a good player, Robinson is. Already pushing all these numbers on the all-time list for the team. I mean, he's already tied for second in touchdowns, so he's somebody that could break that record this year even. Will be fun to watch and see what happens. All right, let's look at the wide receivers on a season basis. As far as receptions go, Julio Jones holds the record for the team by far over Roddy White. Roddy White in 2010 had 115 receptions, which was the record until Julio Jones in 2015 had 136. Smashed that record by quite a bit. So that was pretty impressive. So, in fact, with 136 receptions in a single season, that's good enough to be tied for fourth all time in the NFL. Michael Thomas holds the record with 149, puts Julio Jones in some good company. Current players on this list are Cooper Kupp, who's second with 145, and CeeDee Lamb had 135 in 2023. Justin Jefferson had 128 in 2022, and then Jamar Chase just last year had 127, which tied him with Stephon Diggs, who also had 127 in 2020. So some really impressive numbers um, as far as receiving goes. Now, when we're looking at the current players on the team as far as receptions go, Drake London had 100 exactly, which ties him for seventh on the Falcons all-time list. I expect to see him move up this list. I don't know if he can get 136. I'm really hoping he can get at least 115. We'll see. Last season, even though he had 100, which is impressive, it still puts him tied for ninth place. There were 10 players that had 100 receptions last year, led by Jamar Chase, who had 127. Also, Jamar Chase led in yards with 1,708, which was the highest total last season. Now, as far as the Falcons go all time, Julio Jones holds that record again in 2015. He had 1,871 yards. So, in fact, Julio Jones holds the top 6 spots for the team. Now, this is an area where maybe you'll see Drake London push into the top 6. To break Julio Jones' top 6 on the list, he's going to have at least 1,394 yards. So we'll see. Last season, Drake London had 1,271 yards, which puts him 14th on the list. So this is a category, unlike the running backs, where I think Robinson could move up the list ultimately to the top. It's going to be some work for Drake London to move up this list. But Drake London last season, even though he was tied for ninth in receptions, he was fourth in yardage with 1,271. As I said, Chase had led the league. So pretty good season for him. When it comes to touchdowns last season, again, this is an area where the Falcons don't seem to lean as much on. But Drake London didn't have a bad year. He had 9 touchdowns last season. All-time, Andre Rison, 1993, had 15 touchdowns receiving, which is the most. He holds 2 of the top 3 spots, actually, and 4 of the top 10. So as far as touchdowns goes, he was pretty good, but 15 is the highest. I can see Drake London getting there. The way Penix throws, it could be a case that he does. So with 9, it tied him with 9th in the NFL, Drake London. Again, it was Jamar Chase who had 17, which had a big lead over Terry McLaurin, who had 13. So those are your leaders in the NFL and as far as the Falcons go when it comes to receptions. Tight ends, the most by a tight end was Junior Miller in 1980. He had 9. No tight end really is up there. When it comes to receptions, though, as far as a tight end, Tony Gonzalez in 2012 had 93. So you don't have a tight end at top 100. It made the 100 list, but he was close. So pretty impressive. And again, this is not a team until recently, we'll see, that has a running back that catches a lot of passes out of the backfield. Devontae Freeman in 2015 had 73. That's the most by a running back, even though William Andrews, as a fullback, actually had 81. So top the team's list. Now, when we're looking at receivers this past season, like I said, Drake London had 100 to lead the team. Darnell Mooney had 64. Robinson had 61 receptions, so he could very possibly um, maybe break the record as far as a running back goes for the team this season. We'll watch and see. He's definitely somebody to watch when you're doing fantasy football. All right, let's finish this out with a look at the defense. When it comes to the defense, all time interception leaders, Scott Case. 1988 had 10 interceptions in a single season. That was the most they've ever had. Rolland Lawrence had 9 in 1975. He had held the record until Case came along and broke it. But this past season, Jesse Bates had 4. So really, that's not too bad. You get a player who can have 4 interceptions on every season, you're thrilled. When you look at these numbers, sometimes as far as interceptions go, you'll see a guy get up there pretty high one season, and then that's usually it. You don't see season after season where they're racking up the interceptions. He led the team by 2 over anybody else. The team only had 12 interceptions as a team, so he had a third of those. This past season, as far as in NFL goes, if I can get Kirby Joseph for Detroit had 9, and Xavier McKinney had 8. With 4, Jesse Bates was tied for 10th in the NFL. So that's your leader currently on the team. When we're, like I said, 9, 10, and 9 are the all-time numbers. Tackles for loss. John Abraham had good career with the Falcons. In 2010, he had 18 tackles for loss, and 2 years earlier in 2008, he had 20 tackles for loss. That's the most that the player on the team has had. Now, this past season, the team had, take a look at that, the highest total, only 9 by Grady Jarrett. 9 tackles for loss is the best this past season. So really, no one's anywhere near the numbers of John Abraham. And in fact, with only 9, that's so far down the list as far as that goes. Let me see how far down this list it is. 76th. That's just too far. Actually, I'm sorry, 63rd. So you got 32 teams, you double that, that's 64. There's almost 2 players on every team that have better numbers than Grady Jarrett did. So that's an area of improvement for sure for the Falcons if they want to be contenders. One last category we'll look at, and that's sacks for the team. All right. All-time leader in sacks is John Abraham again with 16 and a half. That's definitely a number you'd think somebody could beat, not by the current level of players on the team. Last season, Arnold Abikidi, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, Abikatai, had 6, only 6. That's the highest total. Again, that's just so far down the list. You have so many players that had more than that, led by Troy Hendrickson, who had 17 and a half to lead the NFL in sacks. So those are your leaders. Obviously, on defense, it's an area where the team, even throughout history, has kind of lacked anybody who's just a standout defensive player. I think they're always relying on the arm of Matt Ryan, wide receiver Julio Jones, and then some pretty good running backs they've had over the years. All right, let's look at this team outlook. So the odds makers have the over under for wins at 7.5. And the reason for that is a little bit of a question whether Penix's inexperience is going to show up um, and hurt the team. Also, just the defense. Is the defense going to be improved enough to help the team make the playoffs? I think that, and I'll talk about whether they make the playoffs or not in a later episode of a later podcast, that is. But I do think they'll get over 7.5 wins. In fact, I think they'll have a winning season this year. And I do think it's because of Penix. They can say inexperience, but this guy's been around the college, played for several teams in college, been one of the best college players. Played 3 games last season. I know it's not that many, but he had the whole year to understand the offense, get ready for this season. This is no In fact, it's better than McCarthy over at Minnesota, who didn't even play last year, but's coming in with 1 year of experience, at least learning the offense. So Penix is, you could say inexperienced, but I think he's gonna be ready. He'll know this. He'll know the system. Also, they play the 4th easiest strength of schedule. This is based on the Vegas win totals. And you gotta remember they play the Carolina Panthers and the New Orleans Saints twice. That's 4 possible wins right there. So, then they just have to figure out how to get 5 more to get to over a 500 record. Um, Saints probably very likely gonna be one of the worst teams in the NFL. So, with an easier schedule, hopefully a somewhat improved defense, but I think a markedly better offense, you could really see an improvement. There's been talk. I mean, I think Penix has been doing quite well, and if Pitts shows up, as there's been rumor that he's really playing like he did his rookie year, you could see a good team next year for the for the Falcons. Now, when we're looking at Fantasy Outlook, which I'm getting these numbers from fantasypros.com. Obviously, Bijan Robinson is a first round pick. He's going anywhere from second to fourth. He's an RB1. I mean, if you're picking and you don't pick a wide receiver like Chase, Robinson's getting picked a lot. Um, then you have Drake London, who's getting picked in the second round, somewhere between 17 and 21. Now, this is based on 12-team leagues. So he's getting picked somewhere in the middle of the second round, early second round. He's wide receiver 10, but I expect actually to see him be better than he's being drafted. So even though he's already being drafted in the second round, I think he's going to be one of the top 5 receivers in the NFL next season. Now, Darnell Mooney is a sneaky guy. I've had him on my team before because when you need a spot player, he can come in and actually does halfway decent. You can pick him up somewhere in the 10th round when you're looking to fill your roster. And in case something happens to Drake London, he's a good fill-in. Now, Kyle Pitts is the wild card. You can pick him up as late as the 11th round, pretty late in the game. But if you are somebody that does not pick a tight end until late in the draft, he's somebody you might think about picking up. And maybe you pick up somebody else, or you pick up Kyle Pitts and he doesn't live up to the hype that's going on this year. You just drop him and get somebody else. And then the last one I'll look at is Tyler Algier. He's being picked up in the 14th round or later. Sometimes he's not even being drafted, but he's somebody, if you have room on your bench, depending on the depth of your bench, and I do pick him up as just a bench player in case something happens to Robinson. Then I've got Algier. Whether I have Robinson on my team or not, I just pick him up in case something happens to Robinson because he's going to step right in and probably get close to 20 carries a game, which would be great. It's like an immediate, RB1 for you. So those are some of your players. Definitely grab Robinson if you can, and London, and the rest of them. It's up to you. And I didn't even mention Penix. Penix has been going pretty late in the draft. He's not much of a runner, not that he can't, and it's a lot of question marks about him. So you can really often pick him up even after the draft is over or very late if you're a player who doesn't draft a quarterback either. If you don't draft him that early, but you can probably pick him up almost anytime you want. Add him, maybe you pick up another quarterback to go with him, and you're just speculate on who might um, be better. Play him, based on the game you're playing. The each week and swap them out back and forth, whatever you need to do. All right, so that's a look at the team. I think it's going to be an improving team. It's going to be a fun team to watch for sure. Um, Good quarterback, great wide receivers, at least with London, and great running back. So you've got a pretty good team on offense. It's just the defense. All right, so next time when I look at another team, I'll look at the Carolina Panthers as we get closer to wrapping up every team and we get closer to the beginning of the season. Stick around as I close out this look at every team, and so you can hear about your greatest players on your favorite team. And if you want, you can check out my previous podcasts. Go to YouTube; they're all there. They're not all video, but of course, you can listen to the audio anywhere. Apple, Spotify, other places you get your podcasts from. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. I appreciate it as I continue to grow it, improve it. Every week I'm trying to work on improving the podcast overall. So I appreciate listening. And again, that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So until next time, I am out.